This is a work of complete fiction created solely for entertainment purposes. All characters, locations, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. Savannah Pierce didn't whisper it. She said it loud enough for the whole farmer's market to hear. Loud enough to make a woman carrying a bag of sourdough freeze mid-step and a retired schoolteacher look up from her tomatoes. "Oh my God, look at her," Savannah said, not even bothering to lower her voice, her phone already raised. "She literally shops at the discount bin." "Ethan, baby, this is what you were married to? A beige woman with a beige life? No wonder you left." The laughter from her friends rippled outward like something ugly dropped in still water. Claire Whitmore didn't flinch. She picked up her rosemary focaccia, tucked it under her arm, and walked away. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Not yet. If this story already has your blood pressure rising, good. Hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's find out just how far this story can travel. Now let's begin. The first thing people noticed about ink and clover was the smell. Before you even touched the door handle, a weathered brass thing shaped like an open book that someone had bolted on crooked and never bothered to fix, you caught it. Coffee, dark and slightly bitter. Old paper, the kind that held its scent for decades, like it had something to say and was in no hurry. And underneath both, something softer. Dried lavender from the bunch Claire tied above the doorframe every spring, even though it was purely decorative and served no practical purpose whatsoever, which is exactly why she kept doing it. The café sat on the corner of Halliday and 15th in Seattle's Queen Anne neighborhood, wedged between a dry cleaner that had been there since 1987 and a small law office whose blinds were always closed. It wasn't a big space. 11 tables, a long wooden counter, a wall of bookshelves that customers were encouraged to browse and occasionally steal from. Claire had stopped keeping track years ago. There was a reading nook in the back corner with two mismatched armchairs and a lamp that buzzed slightly when you turned it on, and every regular knew to avoid the third stool at the counter because one of its legs was shorter than the other three, and the wobble would drive you insane. It was by every measurable standard a small and unremarkable place. Claire Whitmore loved it more than almost anything she had ever owned. She had bought it 6 years ago, right after finishing her MBA, not because she needed something to do, but because she wanted something real, something that operated on her own terms, on a human scale, where the measure of a good day was whether the almond croissants sold out before noon and whether old Mr. Papadakis came in for his Tuesday afternoon Americano and fell asleep over his crossword. It was a deliberate choice, and she had made it with full understanding of what she was walking away from. Most days, that felt like the right decision. Today was not most days. What? She'd been at the farmer's market on Mercer for her weekly flower and herb run when she saw them. She smelled Savannah's perfume first, something aggressively floral that cost more than a week of Claire's groceries, and heard the voice a half-second later, that particular voice, high, carrying, designed to be heard. Claire had turned the corner past a mushroom vendor and walked straight into the performance. Savannah Pierce, 29 years old, 340,000 Instagram followers, and girlfriend of Claire's ex-husband for the past 14 months, was doing what she did best. She was filming. Phone out, chin tilted, one hand resting on Ethan's arm like he was a prop she'd arranged for lighting purposes. She was wearing a cropped white blazer over a beige slip dress, and she had the kind of practiced effortlessness that took considerable effort to maintain. Two friends flanked her, also filming, also laughing. Ethan stood slightly behind her and to the left. He had a coffee cup in his hand and he was looking at his shoes. Claire noticed that. He was looking at his shoes. She should have turned around. She knew the layout of this market better than anyone. She could have looped around through the bread vendors and the flower stalls and been gone before they even registered the movement. She was 5 feet away and partially obscured by a display of squash. It would have been easy. She didn't turn around because she was tired of turning around. She had been turning around for 14 months. She kept walking. The moment Savannah looked up and their eyes met, something shifted in her expression. A flicker of recognition followed almost immediately by that particular kind of smile, the one designed to land like a blade wrapped in ribbon. "Oh, wow," Savannah said, and turned the phone toward Claire. "Babe, look, it's your ex." Ethan looked up from his shoes. His face went very still. Hi, Ethan, Claire said. Hi. A pause. Claire. That was all he managed. She noticed the shadows under his eyes, the slight tension in the way he was holding his jaw. He looked like a man running calculations he didn't want to share. Savannah, meanwhile, was already narrating. Guys, okay, for context, this is who Ethan was married to. I know. She tilted the phone slightly, sweeping it across Claire's light gray sweater, her worn canvas tote, her practical boots. I mean, no shade, obviously, but she laughed. Actually, some shade. Come on, can you imagine? One of the friends said something Claire couldn't quite catch. More laughter. Claire stood there holding her rosemary focaccia and thought, with a clarity that surprised her. She has no idea. Not an arrogant thought, just a simple, factual recognition. Savannah Pierce was performing for 340,000 followers, and she had absolutely no idea who she was performing at, which was not Savannah's fault, technically. Almost no one knew. That was the whole point. She literally shops at the discount bin, Savannah continued, then delivered the line Claire had already heard, and would apparently hear again later in memory for years. This is what you were married to? A beige woman with a beige life? The laughter hit its peak. Claire looked at Ethan one more time. He was back to studying his shoes. She picked up the focaccia, tucked it under her arm, and walked away. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't fire back a single word. But something had changed in the walk home, in the 22 minutes between the market and the back door of Ink and Clover. Something that had been quietly loosening for months finally gave way entirely, like a knot pulled undone by a single steady pressure. By the time she hung her coat on the hook behind the counter, it was gone. Whatever restraint she had maintained for 14 months, the careful, deliberate decision to stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible, had simply finished. She hadn't always been this contained. There was a version of Claire Whitmore that existed before the café, before Seattle, before Ethan Cole. A version that had grown up in the kind of house that had a name instead of a street address. Whitmore Crest, outside Boston, 14 acres, a private dock on the lake, a library that occupied most of the second floor's east wing. Her grandfather, Douglas Whitmore, had built the first factory in 1951. Her father, Robert Whitmore, had expanded the company into a global manufacturing and infrastructure conglomerate with operations across 4 continents. Whitmore Global Industries was the kind of company that appeared in footnotes in other companies' annual reports. Claire was the only child. She had known, from a very young age, exactly what that meant. It meant board meetings she sat in on at 16, watching her father navigate negotiations with the particular patience of someone who didn't need to rush. It meant watching how differently people behaved when they knew your last name. The way voices changed, the way body language adjusted. The careful choreography of people trying to be liked by the right person. It meant understanding, by the time she was 19, that wealth was an instrument that required enormous care because in the wrong hands, or the wrong relationships, it corroded everything it touched. Her father had warned her about that specifically. Sitting in the library one winter afternoon, the lake frozen outside the window, he'd set down his reading glasses and said, without particular drama, "The hardest thing you'll ever learn to do, Claire, is tell the difference between someone who loves you and someone who loves what you represent. Most people can't tell the difference until it's too late. You'll need to be smarter than that." She had thought she was. She was 26 when she met Ethan Cole at a friend's wedding in Portland. Not a society wedding, just a regular backyard ceremony with a string quartet and too much pasta salad. He was funny, warm, slightly scattered, with a laugh that was too loud in the best way. He taught high school history and coached the junior varsity soccer team and had opinions about obscure Pacific Northwest architecture that he would share unprompted and at length. She had liked him immediately, which was unusual for her. She hadn't introduced herself as Claire Whitmore. She'd introduced herself as Claire, or just Claire, which was technically accurate, and he hadn't asked further questions because it hadn't occurred to him that there was anything to ask. They dated for a year, long distance between Seattle and Boston, before she decided to move to Seattle and proposed, over text, which was not romantic, but they had both laughed about it for weeks afterward. She had chosen not to tell him about the money before the wedding. She told herself it was a privacy decision. Looking back, with the particular honesty that comes after divorce, she recognized it had also been a test. She had wanted to be chosen without that variable. She had wanted to know. She found out. Not immediately. Not in the first year or even the second. It came gradually, the way most disappointments do, in small increments barely worth noting on their own. The slight impatience he had started showing when she talked about the café, the way he had begun dressing differently, buying things they didn't need, making references to people we should know as if their social circle were a ladder with rungs. The comments about ambition that were technically about himself but were clearly about her. The way he had started looking at other lives the way someone looks at a menu when they're not happy with what they ordered. By year 4, she knew. By the time he told her, sitting at their kitchen table with the particular care of a man who has rehearsed this, that he thought they had grown in different directions and that he had feelings for someone else, the knowing had already done most of the grieving for her. She had nodded, asked if he was sure. He said yes. She said okay. She didn't tell him about the money then either. She told herself it would have felt like leverage and she had never wanted to win that way. But honestly, she also simply didn't want to watch his face when he understood what he'd done. Some cruelties were unnecessary, even to people who deserved them. The divorce was quiet. Ethan received what the prenuptial agreement had outlined, a figure generous enough to set him up without embarrassment, small enough to be entirely unconnected to the actual scope of Whitmore assets. He probably thought she was being magnanimous. He had no idea. Savannah Pierce arrived, by Claire's rough calculation, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Within 6 months, the Instagram posts had started, not about Claire specifically at first, just Savannah's general performance of her relationship with Ethan, the carefully curated documentation of dinners at restaurants that were beyond their means, events they attended on the periphery of social circles they didn't belong to, the vocabulary of aspiration worn like borrowed clothing. Claire had seen it because mutual friends occasionally mentioned it, not because she'd been looking. Then it became about Claire specifically. A post in November, upgrade season, ladies. Don't let your man settle for comfortable. Comfortable is just scared with better lighting. Accompanied by a photo of Savannah and Ethan at a rooftop bar. The comments were full of people who thought it was about a generic ex. A few mutual acquaintances knew otherwise. A story in January, filmed inside Ink and Clover without Claire's knowledge. Walked into my man's ex-wife's little cafe, LOL. Bless her heart, she's doing her best. Savannah hadn't even bought a coffee. And now this. The farmer's market. Filmed and uploaded within the hour. Claire watched the video once, standing at the cafe counter after closing. A beige woman with a beige life. 42,000 views by midnight. Comments full of laughing emojis and fire emojis, and women tagging each other saying this is iconic. She set the phone face down on the counter. Her manager, Dee, 34, perpetually exhausted, deeply competent, the person who actually kept Ink and Clover running when Claire disappeared for her increasingly frequent business trips, leaned against the doorframe from the back room and watched her. You okay? Fine. You've been standing there for 6 minutes. I know. Dee was quiet for a moment. She had worked at the cafe for 4 years. She knew more about Claire than almost anyone in Seattle, though even Dee didn't know everything. Dee knew that Claire had money somewhere in a background she didn't talk about. She didn't know the shape of it. Do you want to talk about it? Not right now. Okay. Dee pushed off the doorframe. I'm going to close out the register. You should probably eat something. You've got that look. What look? The one that means you've made a decision and you haven't told anyone yet. Claire picked up the phone and put it in her pocket. Go close the register, Dee. She called her father that night from the apartment above the cafe, a small 2-bedroom she had kept deliberately modest, with mismatched furniture and a kitchen that smelled like whatever she'd been baking that week. Robert Whitmore answered on the second ring, which meant he was awake and had been waiting, the way he always seemed to be waiting when something had shifted. You saw the video, she said. It wasn't a question, a pause. Your Aunt Frances forwarded it to me, with a great deal of commentary. I'll bet. She used the phrase unconscionable 4 times. That sounds about right. Claire sat down on the kitchen floor, not in a chair, on the floor, with her back against the cabinet the way she used to sit in the kitchen at Whitmore Crest when she was small and the world felt too large. Dad, I think I'm ready. Another pause, longer this time. When her father spoke again, his voice was careful and exact in the way it always was when something mattered. Ready for what, exactly? You know what for. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, rain had started against the windows, the particular Seattle variety. Not dramatic, just steady, the kind that committed. The board meeting is in 6 weeks, he said finally. I know. There are things that will need to happen before it. I know, Dad. I've known everything that needs to happen for the last 3 years. I've just been. She stopped. I've been waiting. For what? She thought about Ethan's shoes at the farmer's market. She thought about 42,000 laughing emojis. I'm not sure anymore, she said honestly. Her father exhaled slowly, not impatiently. He was never impatient with her, just with the weight of something long held. I'll call the board in the morning, he said. And Claire? Yeah. Wear something that isn't gray. She almost laughed. Dad, I'm serious. You look washed out in gray. Your grandmother always said so. Good night, Dad. Good night, sweetheart. She sat on the kitchen floor for another 20 minutes after they hung up, listening to the rain. Then she got up, went to the counter, and started measuring flour for tomorrow's almond croissants. Some things you didn't change. Some things you kept exactly as they were. The rest she had put off long enough. The almond croissants came out slightly overdone that morning. Claire stood at the café counter at 6:45 a.m., turned one over in her hand, and decided it was still sellable. The bottoms were a shade past golden, not burnt, just insistent. And she had learned long ago that insisting on perfection before opening hour was a good way to throw out half a tray and start the day resentful. She plated them, covered the rack with a cloth, and started on the second batch. Dee arrived at 7, unwinding a damp scarf and already talking. It's 51 degrees and raining sideways, just so you know. Also, the sign out front is crooked again. I think the wind got it. She draped the scarf over the hook by the door and stopped. Did you sleep? Some. That's not a yes. It's not a no either. Claire slid the second tray into the oven. Can you check the milk delivery? I think they shorted us on the oat again. Dee gave her a long look, the kind that meant she had things to say and had decided, at least temporarily, not to say them, and went to check the delivery. The morning proceeded the way mornings at Ink and Clover always did, in its own particular rhythm, the espresso machine finding its hiss, the door opening and closing as regulars filtered in with wet umbrellas, and the specific quiet contentment of people who had somewhere comfortable to be. Mr. Papadakis wasn't in. He came on Tuesdays, and this was Thursday, but a young woman from the architecture firm down the block came in twice before 9, once for a latte and once, sheepishly, for a croissant she'd been thinking about apparently since she left. Claire didn't tease her about it. She understood that impulse entirely. It was a normal morning, but Claire moved through it with something different underneath. A stillness that wasn't quite calm. The way a house feels different when you've already made up your mind to leave it, even if you haven't packed a single box. She had been on the phone until 2 in the morning, not with her father again, Sharks, with Marcus Webb, Whitmore Global's chief legal officer, who had been waiting for this call for the better part of 3 years with the particular professional patience of a man who had stopped allowing himself to hope. He laid out the timeline with brisk, precise clarity. The board announcement, the formal introduction at the foundation gala in 5 weeks, the necessary paperwork in between. He asked twice if she was sure. She said yes both times, and the second time he stopped asking and started working. There would also be the matter of the press. Her father had managed the family's public profile with disciplined discretion for decades, which meant that Claire's existence as the sole Whitmore heir was known within certain circles, the kind of circles where information moved carefully and where no one benefited from being the person who leaked the wrong thing to the wrong outlet. But the gala would change that. Introductions at that level didn't stay contained. You'll need a communications person with you by next week, Marcus had said. Someone to manage the run-up. I have someone in mind, she told him. That someone was currently standing at the milk cooler counting oat cartons. Claire had been thinking about how to have this conversation since about 3 a.m. There wasn't a graceful way to begin it. Dee had worked for her for 4 years. Had watched her come in some mornings, looking like she'd carried something heavy overnight and never once pried. Had covered the cafe for weeks at a time when Claire's business travel took her away, and had done all of it with the assumption, reasonable based on available evidence, that her employer was a moderately successful small business owner with a somewhat mysterious independent income. What Claire was about to tell her was going to require some recalibration. She waited until the mid-morning lull when the tables had thinned out and only two customers remained. An older man working on a laptop and a woman reading a paperback she kept turning face down to check her phone. Claire refilled her own coffee, walked to where Dee was wiping down the far end of the counter, and set down a second mug. "Can you sit for a minute?" Dee looked at the mug, then at Claire. "That depends. Is this a good news conversation or a bad news conversation?" "It's a complicated news conversation. Those are the worst kind." But Dee sat. Claire wrapped both hands around her own mug and thought about how her father had taught her to deliver difficult information, not by softening it into ambiguity, but by stating the core of it first and filling in the context after, like removing a bandage, fast, then thorough. "My full name is Claire Annette Whitmore," she said. "My father is Robert Whitmore. Whitmore Global Industries, the manufacturing and infrastructure company, headquarters in Boston, 47 facilities in 22 countries, publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker WGI. That's my family's company. I'm the only heir. I've been the designated successor since I was 23 years old. In approximately 5 weeks, I'm going to be formally introduced as the incoming CEO at the Whitmore Foundation Gala." Dee sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up the coffee mug, held it in both hands, and stared at the counter. "Okay," she said. "I know that's—" "Hold on." Dee held up one hand. "I'm processing." Claire waited. "When you said you had investors," Dee said carefully, "and I thought you meant like a couple of people who believed in the café." "I know." "And when you went to Boston those 4 times last year for board meetings?" "Yes." "Those were actual board meetings." "They were." Dee set the mug down. She looked like a person trying to do arithmetic in a language they'd never studied. "The cafe is mine. Legitimately mine. I bought it, and I run it, and it matters to me. Nothing about that is a front." Claire held her gaze. "I'm telling you now because what's coming is going to change some things, and you deserve to know what you've been working with, also because I'm going to need your help." "My help." Dee repeated it flatly, the way you repeat something when you're buying time to determine whether you've understood correctly. You're organized, you know how to manage people under pressure, you don't panic, and you actually know me. I need someone who can help coordinate things on this end, the cafe's communications, my local schedule, some of the logistics, while Marcus handles the corporate side. You would be compensated very differently than you are now." "Claire," Dee's voice had gone slightly uneven. "I'm a cafe manager. You've been running this place 60% of the time for the past year and a half. That's not a cafe manager. That's an operations lead who's been underpaid." Claire said it plainly, not cruelly. "I'm correcting that." The woman with the paperback left. The man on the laptop ordered another coffee without looking up. Dee was quiet for almost a full minute, which was unusual for her. "This is why you didn't flinch," she said finally. "What?" "At the market. That video. Any normal person would have been, I don't know, devastated, or at least rattled. You walked back in here and measured flour." She paused. "You already knew this was temporary. The small life." Claire considered that. "It wasn't temporary. I genuinely wanted it. I still want it." She looked around the cafe, the crooked brass handle, the buzzing lamp in the corner, the bookshelf that was perpetually 2 books short of balanced. "But I think I convinced myself wanting it meant I had to choose it exclusively, that having more than this, being more than this, was somehow incompatible with everything I liked about my life. Is it? I don't know yet. I'm about to find out." Dee looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her coffee again and took a slow drink. "Okay," she said. "Okay, you'll help?" "Okay, I'll help. And okay, I need a minute to be completely overwhelmed before I can be useful, so if you could handle the next customer." The bell above the door rang as if on cue. Dee pointed at it without turning around. "That would be great." Claire almost smiled. "Thank you, Dee." "Don't thank me yet. I'm absolutely going to ask you 100 questions, and some of them are going to be embarrassing." I expect nothing less. Ethan Cole had not slept well in approximately 4 months. He wouldn't have admitted this to anyone, including himself, but it was measurable in the way he moved through mornings, slowly, heavily, with the particular fog of a man whose body had given up on the idea of rest as a reliable transaction. He got up, made coffee in the machine Savannah had chosen because it looked impressive on their kitchen counter, even though neither of them had ever figured out the espresso function, and stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their rental apartment looking out at the city. The apartment was on the 16th floor of a building in South Lake Union. It was the kind of apartment that looked like a life rather than a place to sleep, all clean edges and borrowed light and surfaces that required constant maintenance to keep looking the way they looked in the listing photos. The rent was $4,300 a month. The parking space was an additional $315. Ethan's salary as a regional account manager at a mid-sized logistics firm was $94,000 a year. He didn't like to do the math in the mornings. Savannah had moved in 8 months ago, which had felt like a threshold crossed, a commitment made. What he had not fully calculated at the time was the compounding effect of Savannah's lifestyle on their finances. The way spending had become, in their relationship, less a choice and more a current you swam in because stopping felt like an argument neither of them had agreed to have. He poured his coffee and sat at the kitchen island and looked at his phone. The farmer's market video had 68,000 views. Savannah had posted a follow-up story that morning. A close-up of her coffee, some boutique brand with a sleeve that had a quote on it, captioned, "Comfortable is just scared with better lighting, but make it cute, 40,000 views." She was going up. He found himself not for the first time thinking about Claire, not romantically. He was clear on that, had been clear on that for a long time. It was more specific than that. He thought about her the way you think about a choice you made in a moment of certainty and have spent subsequent months re-examining without arriving at a conclusion that satisfied you. He thought about the way she had looked at him at the kitchen table. Not hurt, not angry, just tired, just finished. And then, okay. She had said okay as if she'd already known. He had told himself at the time that it meant she hadn't cared. He was less sure of that now. He'd seen the inside of Ink and Clover once, briefly, maybe a month after the divorce was final. He'd walked past on the way to a meeting, hadn't gone in, just looked through the window. She'd been behind the counter talking to an elderly customer, laughing at something, completely at ease. He'd stood there for about 15 seconds and then walked on, faster than necessary. He had never figured out what the feeling was. He was still working on it. His phone buzzed, a text from Savannah. "Breakfast? That new place on Westlake?" He looked at the text for a moment. "Can't, meeting this morning," he typed back. There was no meeting. He just needed a morning that wasn't performing. Savannah Pierce had a system, and the system was working. Or it had been working, which was essentially the same thing in her estimation, because social media momentum operated on its own internal logic, and the numbers didn't lie. The farmer's market video had done better than anything she'd posted in 3 months. The comments were the right kind of engaged, the kind where people were arguing in the replies, some defending her, some calling her out, which was frankly better than pure agreement, because controversy kept the algorithm fed. She had a brand partnership meeting next Thursday with a small handbag company, and her manager, she still liked saying that even internally, had mentioned that a mid-tier fashion week opportunity might be coming through for the spring. Everything was building, she just needed it to build faster. The problem, one she was aware of but had not yet solved, was the money gap between where they were and where they needed to look like they were. Image was leverage, she understood that fundamentally. But image required investment, and investment required capital. They were currently running slightly thin on. The apartment ate money in large regular bites. The clothing, the restaurants, the events, the occasional car service when Ethan's car was too ordinary for a specific occasion. It accumulated in ways she tracked in a spreadsheet that she opened less and less frequently, because the opening of it always resulted in a mood that didn't photograph well. Ethan had started making noises, not fighting. He wasn't a fighter, which was one of the things she'd liked about him initially, and had recently started finding inconvenient. Just a kind of quiet pressure, questions about whether they could scale back certain things. A dinner conversation that had veered into the subject of savings in a way that she'd redirected successfully, but that kept coming back at slightly different angles. She needed the Thursday meeting to go well. She also needed, she had decided, one more piece of content about Claire. It wasn't cruelty exactly, or not purely, it was strategy. The farmer's market video had performed because there was a story in it, the contrast, the narrative of the upgrade, the specific satisfying logic of a woman who had chosen better. Her followers loved it. The response had been overwhelmingly clear on that. And Savannah had spent enough time studying what her audience responded to know that a story with a protagonist needed occasional returns to the contrast that defined it. She pulled up Claire's Cafe on Instagram. The account was modest. Product photos, occasional candids of the space, an announcement about new seasonal drinks. Nothing threatening, nothing interesting. She tapped through to the location, looked at the reviews. 4.7 stars, 93 reviews, cozy and unpretentious. Best place to disappear for an afternoon, said one. The owner is always there. You can tell she actually loves this place, said another. Savannah put her phone down. Then she picked it up again and texted her friend Brianna. Road trip to a little cafe on Saturday? I have an idea. Saturday arrived with low clouds and a light drizzle that couldn't commit to being actual rain, which was its own kind of aggravating. Savannah arrived at Ink and Clover at 11 with Brianna and their friend Kelsey, all three of them already filming before they came through the door. Claire saw them from the counter. She didn't stop what she was doing, which was restarting the espresso grinder, which had been making a sound it wasn't supposed to make for the last 20 minutes. She had been elbow deep in calibrating it when the bell above the door rang, and she straightened up and turned around, and there they were. Savannah looked surprised for about a quarter second. She had apparently not expected Claire to make eye contact immediately, to be standing right there, present and unbothered. Then the performance resumed. Oh my gosh, Savannah said to her phone. Guys, we're here, this is the place, and wow, it's very, She panned the camera slowly around the cafe. Cozy? If you're like really into that aesthetic. Brianna snorted. What can I get you? Claire said. We wanted to check out the vibe, you know? Savannah moved toward the counter, still filming. We saw it online. It's very rustic, very lived in. We have a full menu on the board. Coffee, tea, food. Dee had appeared in the doorway from the back, and Claire felt rather than saw her stop and assess the situation with the quick accuracy of someone who had watched this exact scenario being discussed in that late-night phone call 2 days ago. Dee retreated slightly, which meant she was nearby without being visible. Savannah leaned on the counter, tilting her phone to get Claire in the frame. So do you, enjoy this? Running a little cafe? Is this the dream, or... She let the end of the sentence float, which was a technique. Leave the space for the other person to say something that could be edited into context later. Claire looked at her for a moment, not coldly, not with visible tension, just directly. It is, actually. Do you want something to drink? Sure. Savannah glanced at the board with performative uncertainty. What would you recommend? For someone who's used to another floating end, better coffee? Behind Savannah, Kelsey pressed her lips together to suppress a smile. The Ethiopian pour-over is good if you have 10 minutes. The latte is solid if you don't. Claire paused. There's also a dark roast if you're the kind of person who thinks more bitterness means more sophistication. A lot of people make that mistake. A silence. Brianna made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Savannah's smile tightened slightly at the edges. I'll take the latte, she said. 3 lattes? Sure. Claire turned to make the drinks with the particular efficiency of someone who had been making them for years without thinking about it. Movements automatic, economical, not performed. She was aware of Savannah filming her back, aware of the low commentary being narrated quietly into the phone. She heard the words basic and sad little apron and something about the shelves. She made 3 good lattes. She charged the correct price. She set them on the counter without drama. Savannah paid with her card, and while she was waiting for the receipt, she looked around the cafe again, this time with slightly less performance in it, something closer to actual observation. Her gaze landed on this reading nook, the buzzing lamp, The two mismatched armchairs with the throw blanket draped over the far one. Do people really come here just to sit and read? Mostly, Claire said. Huh. Not mockery this time. Just a small, flat sound. Then Savannah picked up her latte, turned her phone for a final shot of the exterior, and said to her friends, "Okay, let's go. I'm bored." They left. Claire stood at the counter listening to the bell above the door settle, dematerialized from the back room. "You okay?" "Fine. You were about 3 seconds away from saying something." "About 4, actually." Claire picked up a cloth and wiped the counter. "She paid for the lattes. It's fine." The sad little apron comment. "D. I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." Claire folded the cloth. "Let her have today." The video posted that afternoon. Savannah had titled it, "Visited My Man's Ex-Wife's Coffee Shop." And this is what we found. It performed well. Not as well as the farmer's market video, but well. Comments full of people calling Claire's cafe adorable in the patronizing way, calling Savannah brave for going, calling the whole situation iconic. A handful of contrarian commenters saying Savannah was tacky. Savannah responded to those personally, which boosted the engagement further. Ethan watched it on his phone in the parking garage of his office building, sitting in his car for 11 minutes after work because he hadn't been ready to go up yet. He watched it twice. The second time, he watched Claire specifically. Watched her make the lattes without breaking rhythm. Watched her set them on the counter with that particular composure. Watched her answer Savannah's questions with the exact same even, unhurried directness she had always had. And something about it, something about the specific quality of her stillness, put a cold, formless weight in his chest that he couldn't have named. He had told himself during the divorce and in the months after that Claire's quietness was passivity, that her contentment was a lack of ambition, that choosing a café over a career, a small apartment over a status address, a comfortable marriage over a driving one, that all of it was a kind of settling, and that he had simply recognized it before she did. Sitting in the parking garage, watching her set down 3 lattes like none of this was worth her energy, he was no longer completely confident in that reading. He put the phone away and went inside. The next 3 weeks moved quickly, which was deceptive. On the surface, very little changed at Ink and Clover. Claire was there in the mornings, she made the coffee, she helped Dee repaint the back wall a shade of deep green that they had been debating for 2 years, and that turned out to be exactly right. Warm, unexpected, a little moody. 2 new regulars started coming in, a graduate student working on a thesis about Pacific Northwest urban architecture, and a retired nurse who had moved to the neighborhood recently and who ordered the same chamomile tea every afternoon and always brought her own crossword book. The cafe filled and emptied as it always did. Claire was present in it, but she was also, quietly and in the hours the cafe didn't occupy, doing other things. There were calls with Marcus Webb that lasted up to 2 hours. There were documents to review, strategic briefings to absorb, a board presentation that her father had drafted and that she revised 3 times until it was in language she recognized as her own. There was a wardrobe conversation she had with a stylist in Boston via video call, which lasted 90 minutes and which she found exhausting in the specific way that having opinions about yourself as presentation was exhausting. But she got through it. There were also, courtesy of Marcus's communications contact, 2 quiet profile corrections fed to the right people at 2 business publications. Nothing splashy. Just the kind of whispered groundwork that preceded formal announcements at the level of the Whitmore Gala. Certain people in Seattle's corporate and philanthropic circles began to hear a name mentioned. The name meant very little to most of them because the Whitmore family had been deliberately low profile locally for years by design. But it moved. Dee turned out to be genuinely good at the logistics of it. Scheduling, coordinating, filtering what actually needed Claire's attention from what could be handled at an operational level. She asked her 100 questions, most of them sharp, a few of them embarrassing as promised. She also, one Thursday evening after closing, sat across from Claire with a glass of wine she had poured for both of them and said, without preamble, "You know what I don't understand?" "What?" "Why you stayed small this long." Claire swirled her glass. "I told you. You told me the thing about wanting something real, something human scale. I understand that part." Dee leaned forward slightly. But I watched you today on that call with Marcus. You knew everything. You were 3 steps ahead of everyone in that room. You've clearly been prepared for this for years. She paused. That's not someone who needed to hide. That's someone who chose to hide. Claire was quiet. The divorce? Dee said. Partly. Ethan? Partly. She set the glass down. You know what the embarrassing part is? The part I've never said out loud to anyone? Go ahead. I think I was afraid that once I stepped into all of it, the company, the position, the full name, I would stop being able to tell what was real, about people, about myself. She looked at the table. My grandfather built something massive, and it attracted a specific kind of attention for 3 generations. My father managed it. I watched him manage it. I knew what it looked like when the wealth was the relationship and the person was incidental. She stopped. I didn't want to be incidental. Dee was quiet for a moment. And now? And now I've spent 4 years building something where the person was the whole point, and it turned out the person is still standing. She picked up the glass again. So I think I'm okay. Dee looked at her with the expression she had worn more and more frequently in the past 3 weeks. Something between admiration and the very specific exasperation of someone who had been kept in the dark longer than was strictly necessary. For what it's worth, Dee said, you were always a little intimidating even as a cafe owner. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be comforting. It was meant to be accurate. The invitation to the Whitmore Foundation Gala arrived in the city's philanthropic and business circles in the 3rd week of October, as it did every year. The event was known, annual, prestigious, the kind of gathering where real decisions got made in spaces between the scheduled program. The foundation's charitable work was genuine and substantial, but the gala itself functioned as a convening of the city's actual power. The people whose names were on buildings and in boardrooms and whose decisions shaped what Seattle looked like from the inside. Ethan received his through work, passed along by his company's vice president with a note. Good opportunity, if you can manage the ticket. The ticket was $1,200. He looked at that number for a long time. Savannah, when he told her, reacted the way she reacted to most large-scale opportunities, with a certainty that this was exactly what they needed, and an immediate pivot to wardrobe. This is it, she said, setting her phone down with the particular decisiveness of someone who had just identified a turning point. Ethan, this is the room. This is where we need to be seen. It's a charity gala, Savannah. It's not... I know what it is. I did my research. The Whitmore Foundation. These are serious people, like actual serious. Her eyes were lit in the way they got when a goal came into focus. If we make the right connections there, it changes everything. This is the one. He looked at the invitation. Whitmore Foundation Annual Gala, October the 31st, Harborview Grand. He didn't have a reason to say no. He didn't have a reason that felt solid enough to say, out loud, I have a feeling about this that I can't explain, and it isn't good. So he said nothing, and Savannah started planning, and the date moved toward them with the momentum of a thing already decided. 30 miles away, Claire Whitmore stood in the back room of Ink and Clover, looking at her own copy of the evening's program, which Marcus had couriered to her with a handwritten note in the margin next to her name. You sure about the red? She picked up a pen and wrote underneath it, Dad said no gray. Red it is. She put the program in the drawer, locked the back room, and went to help Dee with the dinner rush. The morning of October 31st, Claire burned her toast. She was standing in her kitchen at 7:15, phone wedged between her shoulder and ear, while Marcus ran through the evening sequence of events for the 3rd time this week, and she smelled it a full 30 seconds before she did anything about it. She pulled the bread out, looked at it, and put it in the sink. She wasn't hungry anyway. The chairman opens at 8 sharp, Marcus was saying. Remarks run approximately 12 minutes, then the formal introduction. You'll enter from the left side of the stage. There will be applause. I want you prepared for that, because the first 10 seconds matter, and if you look startled, it reads as unprepared. I won't look startled. You also won't look stiff. The balance is, Marcus. She turned on the kettle. I've been in boardrooms since I was 16. I understand the balance. A pause. Right. Yes. He exhaled slightly. I apologize. I've been managing this transition for 3 years, and the proximity of the actual event is apparently affecting my composure. It's fine. What else? Your father lands at 2. He wants dinner before the gala. Just the two of you, he said. He named that Italian place you used to go to on East Lake. Carmine's. That one. 7 o'clock reservation, which gives you 2 hours before you need to be at the harbor view. Tell him I'll be there. She poured the water over her tea and stood at the window looking down at the street below. The city was doing what Seattle did in late October. Wet, gray, moving. A delivery driver was arguing with a parking meter. A woman with a stroller was trying to hold an umbrella and a coffee cup simultaneously and failing at both. How many people from the local business community will be there tonight? 312 confirmed. Another 40 or so expected to attend without RSVPing, which is its own statement about certain people's relationship with basic courtesy. A shuffle of papers. The technology and infrastructure contingent is well represented. Several people who've been curious about the succession timeline for years, and he stopped. And there will be some people in that room who have heard whispers over the past few weeks and are coming specifically to confirm what they've heard. The groundwork you asked for was effective. Claire nodded at no one. Good. There is one item I feel obligated to raise, Marcus said, with the careful tone he reserved for things he'd been sitting on. Ethan? A brief pause. His company's VP put him on the list 3 weeks ago. I noticed it in the registration review. I didn't flag it before because I wasn't certain you. I knew. She had checked the registration herself 2 weeks ago, out of a precise combination of preparedness and something she wasn't quite ready to call anything. It's fine, Marcus. You're sure? He's allowed to attend a gala. It's not his fault the gala turned out to be about me. It might be about several things at once, from his perspective. That, Claire said, is entirely his problem. She finished her tea. I'll see you tonight. She set the phone down on the counter and looked at the burned toast still in the sink. Then she got dressed and went downstairs to open the café. It was a Saturday, which meant the morning rush ran longer and louder than weekdays, and for that Claire was grateful. There was no space in a Saturday morning at Ink and Clover for the particular self-conscious hovering that the day ahead might otherwise have produced. There were orders to fill and a table of 4 who couldn't agree on anything, and a small disaster involving the oat milk steamer that required 15 minutes of focused attention and 2 sets of hands to resolve. She worked the counter until noon and only came out from behind it twice, once to help an older gentleman find the book he'd been hunting on the shelf. A particular collection of Chekhov's stories, small blue spine, 3rd shelf from the bottom, which she located in approximately 8 seconds, and once to fix the sign out front, which had gone crooked again. Just before 1 o'clock, Dee appeared at her elbow. Go, Dee said. I know what you were going to do. You were going to find 3 more things that needed doing so you could stay until 4. Dee took the cloth out of Claire's hand. I have it. Go. Claire looked at the cafe, the tables, the counter, the greenback wall that had turned out exactly right. You know the Saturday close procedure. I've done the Saturday close procedure approximately 200 times. Go, Claire. Claire untied her apron. Call me if anything. I'm not calling you. It's a cafe, not a surgical theater. Dee folded the apron over her arm. You can check in tomorrow morning. Tonight, be somewhere else. Claire picked up her bag from the back room. At the door, she turned back once. The cafe was full and warm and exactly itself. The lamp buzzing softly in the corner, the espresso machine hissing, someone's abandoned paperback face down on the table nearest the window. It looked like it always looked. It would still look like this tomorrow. She pushed open the door and stepped into the cold October air. Carmine's had been there for 30 years, which was how Robert Whitmore preferred his restaurants. Old enough to have stopped trying to impress anyone, confident enough in their food to light the room at a level where you could actually see the people across from you. He was already there when Claire arrived, sitting at the corner table he always requested, and he stood when he saw her come through the door with the particular old-school courtesy he had never shed despite the fact that she had told him approximately 40 times that it wasn't necessary. She hugged him. He was 67, and he still wore a watch that had belonged to his father, a plain silver thing that had no business keeping time as reliably as it did. You look well, he said, holding her by the shoulders at arm's length, the way parents do when they haven't seen you in a few weeks. You look tired, she said. I am tired. I've been tired for about 2 years. He sat. It's why we're doing this. They ordered. He got the veal, she got the pasta, and they talked for a while about the things they always talked about when the large subject was in the room, and neither of them was ready to address it head-on yet. The Foundation's charitable work for the year, her Aunt Frances, a decision the board had made in September that he thought was short-sighted and she agreed was short-sighted, and whether Carmine's had changed the recipe for the bread service or if it had always been this good. It was halfway through the pasta that her father set down his fork and looked at her steadily. How are you, actually? Claire considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I feel clear, she said, which surprises me a little. Why? Because I expected to feel more, I don't know, braced, like I was walking into something difficult. She turned her fork slowly. Instead, I just feel like something is ending the way it was always going to end, and I'm not fighting it anymore. Her father looked at her for a moment, and something in his face shifted. Not dramatically, just the way a person's expression changes when they recognize something they've been watching for a long time. You know, I never thought hiding was the wrong choice, he said. I want you to know that. I understood why you made it. I know. I just thought... He picked up his wine. I thought you'd find what you were looking for sooner, the knowing. Ethan helped with the knowing, she said, just not in the way I wanted. No. He was quiet a moment. Will it be uncomfortable tonight, seeing him? Probably. She was honest about that. But uncomfortable and important aren't the same thing. Tonight is important. Robert Whitmore looked at his daughter across the table and felt something he would not have described aloud, but that was present nonetheless. A mix of admiration and the specific grief of watching a child carry something heavy and knowing, finally, that they no longer need your help to carry it. Your grandmother, he said, would have been insufferably smug about all of this. Claire laughed, a real one, sudden and unguarded. She would have been absolutely awful about it. She would have wanted to watch the whole thing live from the front row. She would have narrated it, loudly. They finished dinner. He paid. She had long since stopped arguing about that. And at the door he straightened her collar, which didn't need straightening, and said simply, You belong in that room, Claire. You always did. She kissed him on the cheek. I'll see you there. Bessen. The Harborview Grand sat on the waterfront and had been the site of more transformative conversations than its lobby plaques would ever acknowledge. It was the kind of building that understood its own function, a container for moments that required architecture equal to their weight. The ballroom on the upper floor held 350 people comfortably, had ceilings 22 feet high, and was currently being transformed by a florist and an events team who had been working since 11 that morning. Claire arrived through the side entrance at 8:50, bypassing the main approach entirely. Marcus met her in the corridor outside the staging area, looked at the dress, deep crimson, minimal, devastating in its simplicity, and exhaled. Your father was right about the gray, he said. He usually is. How are you feeling? Ask me something useful. Fair. He handed her a single folded card. Final sequence. Chairman's remarks, your introduction, you walk to the podium, brief statement, no more than 6 minutes, we discuss this. Then the reception opens and you circulate. I'll be at the south end of the room. Who's seated near the stage? Hargreaves from Pacific Northwest Capital, the Delacroix family. Doctor, sung from the University Endowment. Several others you'll recognize. He paused. Your ex-husband is at table 19. Far right side of the room. Claire folded the card once more and handed it back. Then I won't be looking at table 19. Wise. She found a quiet corner near the staging door and stood there alone for 5 minutes. Not meditating. She wasn't the type. Just breathing. Just letting the evening exist around her without rushing toward it or away from it. She could hear the room filling on the other side of the wall, the low collective sound of 300 people who knew each other in varying degrees, the clink of glassware, the particular frequency of gathered importance. She had stood in rooms like this since she was a child, watching her father work them with his specific patient authority. She knew what they felt like. She knew the acoustics of power in an enclosed space, how it collected in corners, how it moved between people, how the dynamic shifted when someone walked in who changed the room's center of gravity. Tonight, she was going to be that shift. She straightened up, checked nothing because there was nothing to check, and waited for her name. Savannah Pierce had spent $430 on the dress, and she was absolutely certain it was worth it. It was red, not the deep, controlled crimson of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, but a bright, loud, demanding red, the kind that announced its presence in every room it entered. She had found it at a boutique on Capitol Hill, put it on layaway for 2 weeks, picked it up Thursday, and had not had a quiet moment since about whether it was the right choice. Now, standing at the entrance to the Harborview Grand's main ballroom, with Ethan beside her and her phone discreetly in her clutch for the inevitable content opportunity, she felt the low current of anxiety that she had learned to convert, through practice, into performance. "This is incredible," she said quietly, scanning the room with the trained assessment of someone who had spent years cataloging the visual vocabulary of wealth. "Ethan, look at this room." Ethan looked at the room. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they know they don't entirely belong in, but have decided to stand inside anyway. "It's nice," he said. "Nice." Savannah made a sound that was technically a laugh. "Babe, these are the actual people, the real ones." She touched his arm. "We just need to talk to the right 3 people tonight and everything changes." He didn't answer. She had been watching him all week, the way he moved through their apartment with the particular quiet of someone turning something over in his mind and not ready to put it down. She had attributed it to work stress, or the cost of the evening, or the generalized low-grade anxiety she had noticed creeping into him over the past few months. She had not asked directly because asking directly would have opened a conversation she was not ready for. Instead, she had focused on tonight, as she focused on most things, as a problem of execution and visibility. They made their way to table 19, which she registered with a twitch of irritation was farther from the stage than she would have liked. A man and woman were already seated, middle-aged, well-dressed in the understated way, the kind of clothes that cost more because they were made to look like they cost less. The man introduced himself as Thomas Hargrove, regional VP at a logistics company. His wife, Louise, had the eyes of someone who had attended hundreds of these events and had long since stopped finding them interesting but still found people interesting, which was a different thing. "First time at the Foundation Gala?" Louise asked Savannah, with genuine curiosity rather than condescension, though Savannah heard condescension regardless. "Yes, we've been looking forward to it." Savannah unfolded her napkin with practiced ease. "It's such an important event for the city." "It is," Louise agreed, "though the real event is usually the announcement. Have you heard anything about the Whitmore succession? There's been talk for weeks." "Whitmore? As in the foundation?" "As in Whitmore Global." Louise glanced toward the stage. "Robert Whitmore has been running it for decades. There's been a lot of speculation about who takes over. Some people think it's going to be a named external hire, but..." She tilted her head slightly. "There were some whispers last week that it might be family." Ethan, who had been pouring water, went still. "Family?" he said. "A daughter, supposedly, though no one's been able to confirm." Louise shrugged mildly. "We'll know soon enough." Ethan set the water pitcher down very carefully. Savannah was looking at the stage, already composing the frame in her head, the shot she'd take, the caption she'd use, the particular combination of proximity and aspiration that would translate well. She didn't notice the way Ethan's face had gone through something in the last 15 seconds. She didn't notice that he had gone very quiet in a way that was different from his regular quiet. She was looking at the stage. He was looking at his hands. The light shifted at 8:03, which was 3 minutes late by Marcus's timetable and exactly on schedule by everyone else's. The chairman of the Whitmore Foundation, a man named Gerald Park, who had served in that role for 11 years and who had the voice of someone who had been in too many acoustically poor boardrooms and had learned to compensate, stepped up to the podium and waited for the room to settle. It settled quickly. Gerald Park had that effect. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "The Whitmore Foundation has been part of the city's fabric for more than 60 years. Many of you in this room have contributed to that work, and many of you have benefited from it, sometimes without knowing it, which is how the best work tends to operate." Light, appreciative laughter. Tonight is significant for several reasons. He looked down at his notes once, briefly, then put them aside. Robert Whitmore has been at the helm of Whitmore Global Industries for 29 years. Under his leadership, the company has grown from a two-continent manufacturing operation into one of the most respected infrastructure enterprises in the world. He has done this with rigor, patience, and a particular refusal to sacrifice long-term integrity for short-term visibility, which, in the current landscape, is either deeply admirable or slightly inconvenient, depending on who you ask. More laughter, warmer this time. Robert has also spent the past several years ensuring that the company's next chapter is in the most capable hands available to him. Gerald Park looked toward the wing of the stage. It is my honor to introduce to you, formally and with considerable personal pride, the incoming CEO of Whitmore Global Industries. He paused. The room was completely quiet. Claire Annette Whitmore. The door to the left of the stage opened. Later, people who were there would describe it differently depending on where they sat and what they were looking at when it happened. The ones near the stage described the way she walked. Not quickly, not with performance, just with the complete absence of hesitation, the kind of movement that came from someone who had decided something and was simply proceeding. The ones farther back described the dress first, the deep crimson in the ballroom's warm light. And then the way the room responded, the applause beginning in the front rows and spreading back like a current finding its path. The ones at table 19 described two things. Savannah Pierce dropped her phone. It hit the edge of the table and clattered to the floor, and she didn't immediately reach for it, which was extraordinary by any metric. She was staring at the stage with an expression that required several seconds to fully resolve. The initial non-recognition, the calibration, the slow arrival of a comprehension that restructured everything before it. Ethan Cole did not drop anything. He had nothing in his hands to drop. He sat completely still, and the color left his face with the quiet efficiency of something being drained. On the stage, Claire reached the podium, adjusted the microphone exactly once, and looked out at the room. 300 people were on their feet. The applause was the kind that had texture to it, not polite, not performed, but the sound of people who recognized the weight of a moment and were responding to it honestly. Claire stood at the podium and let it land, not smugly, not with triumph on her face, just present, just there, the same way she stood at the counter of ink and clover waiting for the espresso to pull, patient with the process, certain of the outcome. When the room settled, she leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Thank you," she said. And then, with the measured ease of someone who had been preparing for this for years and had finally, simply decided the preparation was sufficient. "My father built something remarkable. I intend to honor that by building something better." The room responded. At table 19, Savannah had retrieved her phone from the floor and was holding it in both hands without filming anything, which was so unlike her that Ethan noticed it as the data point it was. Is that... Savannah's voice had gone strange. "Is that the woman from the café?" Ethan didn't answer. "Ethan." She turned to him, and he watched the understanding working its way through her expression in real time, each piece landing and rearranging the ones before it. "That's Claire. That's your Claire. I heard the announcement," Ethan said. "She's the CEO of... That's Whitmore Global. Do you understand what that..." Savannah stopped, pressed her fingers against her mouth. The color had done something complicated in her cheeks. "She owns... The café is real," Ethan said. "The café is real. She just also owns other things." The woman on the stage was speaking, but neither of them was hearing it. Savannah was doing what Savannah did when a reality reconfigured itself in her head. She was processing it through the lens of image, of appearance, of what it meant for visibility and perception. Working through what it meant for the videos, for the posts, for the performative comparison she had built content on for 14 months. Ethan was not doing that. Ethan was remembering the kitchen table, her saying okay, the way she'd looked at him, not devastated, just finished, and the thing he'd told himself it meant, and the thing he was now understanding it had actually meant. She had known exactly what she was giving up. She had given it up anyway. Not because she didn't have other options, not because the cafe was all she had. She had chosen a small life deliberately, and she had stayed in it deliberately. And when he left, she had let him go without using any of the 100 things she could have used, because she was the kind of person who did not win that way. And he had stood at the farmer's market 2 months ago and said nothing while the woman he'd been sharing a bed with for 14 months called her beige. Louise, from table 19, leaned over with the benign interest of someone watching a play resolve itself satisfyingly. "The daughter," she said, nodding toward the stage. "I knew it." Thomas Hargrove was already standing, adding his applause to the room's. Savannah put her phone in her clutch. Ethan sat still for another moment, then stood because everyone around him was standing, and the alternative was to remain seated and visible in his stillness, which was worse. He clapped. He didn't know why. His hands did it without his involvement. On the stage, Claire was stepping back from the podium, exchanging a brief word with Gerald Park, and then her father was there. Robert Whitmore, 67, silver-haired, moving with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who had been watching this moment coming for years. He embraced her briefly, and whatever passed between them in that moment was private and stayed that way. The room was still applauding. Savannah leaned close to Ethan and said very quietly, her voice stripped of almost everything except the bare fact of the words, "She never told you." "No," Ethan said. "Why?" He looked at the stage where Claire was now moving into the ballroom's reception space, already being approached by the first wave of people who wanted proximity to what she was becoming. "I think," he said, and stopped. Tried again. "I think she wanted to know if what we had was real without it." Savannah was quiet for a moment. "Was it?" she asked. Not provocatively, just the question, plain. Ethan looked at the stage for another long second. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I stopped trying to find out." The reception was everything a Whitmore Foundation event was built to be. Claire moved through it with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, fully present to each conversation, genuinely there, not monitoring the room from behind a smile. She spoke with Hargreaves from Pacific Northwest Capital for 11 minutes, with Dr. Sung for 7, with a woman named Patricia Delacroix, who ran the city's largest private charitable trust, and who fixed Claire with the sort of direct appraisal that only people who had survived decades at the top of a room could manage. "Your father," Patricia said, "has been holding his breath for about 3 years." "I know," Claire said. "He talks about you the way men talk about things they're proud of but haven't figured out how to say directly." "That's accurate." Patricia smiled, not warmly exactly, but with the precise respect of one professional for another. "You'll do well. Don't try to do it the way he did it. He's the first to tell you that." "He has," Claire said, "several times." "Then you're already ahead." She moved on. She was aware of table 19 the way you're aware of a sound at the edge of hearing, not intrusively, just there. She had not looked directly at it since taking the stage, and she was not going to look directly at it now. Not out of avoidance. The evening was not about that table. The evening was about what she was stepping into, and she had enough respect for the weight of that to give it her full attention. Marcus appeared at her elbow at 10:15. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. You've been standing for 90 minutes, so have most people in this room." She accepted a glass of water from a passing server. "What time does it wrap?" "Officially 11. In practice, 11:30. He paused. "Your father has been circling that group near the windows for 20 minutes. I think he's waiting for you." She looked across the room. Robert Whitmore was standing with a small cluster of people, and he had his hands in his pockets in the way he did when he was comfortable. Not performing, just present. He caught her eye from across the room and nodded once, briefly. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and crossed toward him. On the way, at the far edge of her peripheral vision, she registered a flash of bright red somewhere near the corridor that led to the exit. She didn't turn her head. She had somewhere to be. Savannah walked out of the Harbor View Grand at 10:18 with her clutch held in both hands and her shoes making sharp sounds on the marble floor of the lobby. Ethan was 2 steps behind her. They didn't speak until they were outside, the cold October air hitting them both with the particular clarity of a city that had been rained on all day and had not quite finished. Savannah stopped at the top of the steps and stood there, facing the water. "I want to go home," she said. Okay. I don't mean, I don't want to talk about it. I just want to go home. Okay, Savannah. She started down the steps. He followed. The night was quiet in the specific way that followed large events, the kind of quiet that arrived after a lot of noise and felt enormous by contrast. He thought about what he'd said to her at the table. I stopped trying to find out. He turned it over in his mind on the walk to the car, testing its honesty, finding it adequate. He had stopped trying. That was true. And the question was not why he had stopped. He knew why, or thought he did, or had told himself a version of why that had been sufficient until tonight. The question was what stopping had meant, what it said about a man's particular relationship with the things he chose not to examine. He wasn't ready to answer that. He opened the car door for Savannah, and she got in without looking at him, and he walked around to the driver's side and sat in the dark for a moment before starting the engine. Inside the harbor view, 3 floors up, through the tall windows that faced the water, the ballroom was still lit and still full. He could see the shapes of people moving through the light. He started the car. The story broke on a Monday. Not the tabloid kind of breaking. No splashy headline, no paparazzi photograph, no breathless entertainment account running the clip. It moved the way real stories moved in real circles, through the business press first, then the broader financial media, then the kind of long-form profiles that took 3 weeks to research and arrived with the weight of something considered rather than rushed. The Seattle Business Journal ran a piece on Tuesday under the headline Whitmore Global Names Successor, the Heiress, who spent 6 years running a café. The Wall Street Journal picked it up Thursday with a more measured framing about succession strategy and long-term institutional leadership. A national magazine reached out to Marcus about a profile. He forwarded the request to Claire. She looked at it for 2 days and then said yes, because she had made a decision to stop managing her own disappearance, and this was part of what that meant. The café piece was the one that traveled farthest and fastest, because it was the most legible as a story. It had the clean lines of something people recognized. A wealthy woman who chose a small life, a quiet identity held carefully for years, a moment of public revelation. Journalists love a reveal. They love even more when the reveal has a villain, someone whose behavior before the reveal looks, in retrospect, like a very public miscalculation. Savannah Pierce was not named in the early pieces. She was described, in the business coverage, only obliquely. References to a documented public mockery of the incoming CEO prior to the gala announcement, sourced to social media records. It was enough. People who had seen the videos, the farmer's market clip, the cafe walkthrough, the running commentary of the preceding 14 months, made the connection immediately, and the connection made its own noise. Savannah woke up on Wednesday morning to 47 new messages and a comment section that had turned. She lay in bed and scrolled through them for 17 minutes without getting up. The tone had shifted overnight in the way social media tones shifted, not gradually but suddenly, a herd finding a new direction and moving with collective speed. The same followers who had sent fire emojis for the farmer's market video were now sending different things. The comments were not all vicious. Some were just cool, the specific coolness of people quietly withdrawing approval. But enough of them were pointed that the cumulative effect was disorienting. Words like embarrassing and karma appeared with frequency. Someone had made a compilation video titled Influencer Mocks Billionaire CEO for Being Beige. It had, as of the moment Savannah checked, 214,000 views. She put the phone face down on the nightstand. Ethan was already up. She could hear him in the kitchen, the coffee machine, the specific sound of a person moving through a morning with their thoughts going somewhere else entirely. They had not had the conversation yet. They had come home from the gala, and she had changed out of the dress, and he had sat on the couch, and they had watched television without watching it. And at some point they had both gone to sleep, and since then the conversation had existed as a shape in the room that neither of them had addressed directly. She got up and went to the kitchen. He was standing at the window with his coffee, still in yesterday's clothes from the waist down. He'd changed his shirt, but apparently not his slacks, which was the kind of detail that signaled a certain quality of overnight mental activity. "Did you see it?" she asked. "The compilation?" "Yeah." She poured her own coffee and stood on the other side of the kitchen island. Between them, about 4 feet of marble countertop and approximately everything. It'll pass, she said, not with conviction. More the way you say something to test whether it's true. Ethan looked at her. He had the expression he got when he was about to say something he'd been rehearsing. Not malicious, just careful. Savannah, don't. I'm not trying to. I know what you're not trying to do. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I just need today to. I need a day. He looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. She took her coffee back to the bedroom and closed the door, and he stood at the window and looked at the city for a long time. Marcus had advised Claire gently but firmly to stay off social media entirely for the first 2 weeks following the announcement. Not because you've done anything wrong, he'd said, but because any engagement you make right now will be read as strategic, and the best strategic move is visible non-engagement. She had agreed to this because it was correct, not because it was easy. What she had not agreed to was stopping checking, which was a distinction she permitted herself with minimal self-judgment. She looked at the compilation video on Thursday morning, sitting at the back table at Ink and Clover with her coffee before the doors opened. Watched it twice. The familiar footage, the farmer's market, the cafe walkthrough, the voice she had been hearing in her peripheral awareness for over a year. And then, cut against it, the gala stage, the announcement, the applause, the crimson dress. The compilation had no narrator. It didn't need one. The juxtaposition was the whole argument. She set the phone face down on the table. Dee came through the back door with 2 bags of flour over one shoulder and stopped when she saw Claire's expression. The video, Dee said. The video. 200,000 views last I checked. More now. Dee set the flour down and poured herself a coffee from the morning's first batch. She sat across from Claire without being invited, which was a prerogative she had earned. How do you feel about it? Claire considered the question honestly, the way she always tried to consider Dee's direct questions. Complicated. Complicated like satisfied. Complicated like, it didn't need to happen this way. She turned the mug in her hands. I didn't do this to embarrass anyone. I wasn't thinking about Savannah at all when I made the decision. I was thinking about... She stopped. The company, Dee said. The company. My father. The work that needed to happen. A pause. Myself, maybe. In that order. And now Savannah's a punchline. Now Savannah's a punchline, Claire said. And I understand why people find that satisfying, and I'm not going to pretend I feel nothing about 14 months of being documented as a joke. But it's not the point. It was never the point. Dee was quiet for a moment. Outside, the first gray light of a Seattle morning was finding its way through the front windows. You know what the internet never credits people with? Dee said eventually. What? Restraint. She picked up her mug. Doing something without trying to land it on anyone. Just doing it because it needed doing. She looked at Claire steadily. That's not nothing. Claire didn't answer, but she didn't disagree. The consequences for Ethan arrived not in one event, but in accumulation, which was its own particular form of difficulty. It started at work. Not dramatically. There was no confrontation, no formal conversation with HR, nothing that could be pointed to as a single moment. It was more like a change in weather that everyone felt but no one announced. His vice president, Gary Tillman, a man whose professional warmth had always been efficiently calibrated to proximity and usefulness, became slightly less available after the Wednesday articles. A meeting Ethan had expected to be included in happened without him, and when he asked Gary about it, Gary said it had been a scheduling thing, which was plausibly true but felt incomplete. On Friday, Gary stopped by Ethan's desk, not calling him into the office, just stopping by, which was somehow worse, and said, with the measured friendliness of a man delivering a carefully worded message in casual clothing, "Hey, how are things?" "Fine," Ethan said. "Good. That was quite a gala last week." Gary perched on the edge of the adjacent desk. "Whitmore Global, that's a major story. You know, a few of our board members have relationships with that company. Long-standing relationships." Ethan felt the temperature in the conversation and said nothing. "I only mention it," Gary continued, "because a few people noticed the connection. You and the new CEO." He paused. "I don't think it needs to be anything. I just wanted to make sure we were aligned on the importance of those relationships." We're aligned, Ethan said. Good. Good. Gary stood. You have the Henderson account review next week? Tuesday. Good. Let's make sure that one goes smoothly. He walked away. Ethan sat at his desk for a moment after Gary left, processing the shape of what had just happened. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anything he could take to HR. It was the very specific signal that his professional existence had become, for certain people, adjacent to a liability, and that adjacency was being noted. He had not done anything wrong, technically. He had attended a public event. He had been married to someone who turned out to be someone else, or rather, who turned out to have been herself all along, which was not the same thing. But Savannah's videos were out there. They were attached to his name by association. And in a city where the woman he had divorced was now one of the most significant figures in regional business, that association was not a small thing. He drove home slowly that evening, taking the long route along the water, not ready for the apartment yet. The apartment had begun to feel different in the last 2 weeks. The way spaces feel when the energy inside them has shifted, but the furniture hasn't moved yet. Savannah was present in it differently, quieter, more contained. The performance dialed down in a way that revealed, beneath it, a person Ethan didn't fully know. She was genuinely smart. He had always known that. The strategic intelligence that had built her following from nothing was real. But stripped of momentum, stripped of the forward motion that kept her relationship with uncertainty at bay, she moved through their shared space with a flatness he found both more honest and harder to be around. The partnership inquiries had slowed, not stopped. She still had existing relationships that were holding, but the Thursday meeting had not gone the way she'd hoped. The handbag company had been polite and had extended the conversation, which in Savannah's experience meant they were waiting to see how the news cycle settled before committing. 3 brand deals she had been expecting to close in November had gone quiet. Her follower count had ticked down by 11,000 in 5 days, which was not catastrophic, but was not nothing. She had spent a long afternoon on Sunday going through her content backlog, looking at the posts the way you looked at old photographs, with the distance of someone who recognized the person in them but no longer felt continuous with them. I want to take some of them down, she said to Ethan that evening. He was reading, or trying to. Which ones? The ones about the cafe and the market. She had her phone in her lap. The compilation is just going to keep resurfacing them. If I take them down, it won't make the compilation disappear. I know, but it feels like... She stopped, and the stop was more honest than what came after it. It's embarrassing, Ethan, standing alone. I know it was embarrassing before, but now, take them down if you want to take them down. She looked at him. You're not going to tell me whether it's the right call. You're better at social media strategy than I am. I don't know if it's the right call. That's not what I'm asking. He put the book down. She was looking at him with the particular expression she wore when she was asking something she hadn't articulated yet, and what she was actually asking, what was underneath the question about the posts, was something larger, and they both knew it. What do you want me to say, Savannah? I want you to say something real. He was quiet for a moment. The apartment around them felt large in the way it felt when you had paid for more space than you could fill with comfort. I think, he said carefully, that we have been performing a version of a life for 1.5 years, and I think I went along with it because it was easier than figuring out what I actually wanted, and that was... He stopped. That wasn't fair to you because you were building something real in your terms, and I was just along for it, somewhere else mentally. Savannah looked at him for a long time. Where? She asked. He didn't answer because the honest answer was complicated, and the honest answer involved a kitchen table and a woman saying, okay, in a voice that had meant something he hadn't understood until recently, and he didn't think that was what Savannah needed to hear tonight. I don't know, he said, which was only partially true. And they both understood it was partially true. She looked at her phone. After a long moment, she opened Instagram and deleted 4 posts. Then she put the phone face down on the table and sat back, and neither of them said anything for a while. By the second week of November, the shape of the aftermath had become clear enough to see. Ethan's role at the logistics company quietly shifted. He was not demoted. There was no formal paperwork, no reduction in title. But the Henderson account review had been reassigned without explanation, and a project he had been lead on for 6 months had a new name at the top of the status documents. Gary Tillman remained cordial in the particular way of a man who has made a calculation and is comfortable with it. Ethan understood what was happening. He had been sidelined with enough professionalism that he couldn't object to any specific thing, which was the whole architecture of the thing. He started updating his resume on a Thursday evening while Savannah was on a call in the other room. Not in a panic, just with the quiet recognition that the situation's direction was established and getting ahead of it was better than waiting for the formal conversation that would eventually arrive. He looked at the resume for a long time. 14 years of work history. The teaching, which he had genuinely loved but had left because he'd convinced himself it wasn't enough, convinced himself at a specific moment in their marriage when enough had started being measured against a standard he now recognized had never been his own. The logistics work, which was competent and paid adequately, and which he was good at without caring about. He thought about what he was good at caring about. It had been a while since he'd asked that question. Savannah Pierce was not destroyed by the end of November. She would have said so herself, later, with the particular honesty she developed slowly and at some cost. She was not destroyed. She was recalibrated, which was more painful in some ways because recalibration required looking at what you had been calibrated to in the first place. The follower count stabilized at around 300,000, then crept back slightly. Not to the pre-gala levels, but enough to indicate that the audience hadn't fully walked away. She had made a choice in the second week of November that surprised people, including herself. She had posted a video. Sitting in front of a plain wall, no special lighting, no notable outfit, just her face and the phone, and a statement that ran about 4 minutes. She didn't apologize in it, not in the performed, elaborate way that public apologies tended to run when they were designed for optics rather than honesty. She said straightforwardly that she had been building a narrative for her audience that used another person as a contrast device, and that the other person was a human being who hadn't consented to that role, and that regardless of how the story had ended, that had been wrong. She said it without footnotes. She didn't mention Claire by name. She didn't ask for anything from her followers. She filmed it in one take and posted it before she could change her mind. The response was divided, which was what she had expected. A meaningful portion of her audience respected it. Some thought it was strategic, some didn't care either way. She had made peace with the fact that she couldn't control the reading. She had made the video because it was the honest thing to do, and she was trying, slowly and imperfectly, to organize more of her choices around that standard. Her relationship with Ethan ended 3 weeks after the gala, by mutual agreement, with less drama than either of them might have expected. They had grown into each other's lives because their needs had aligned at a particular moment, and the moment had passed. They divided the few things they had bought together. She kept the coffee machine she liked. He took a box of books. They had a conversation on the last day that was the realest conversation they had ever had, which said something about the 16 months preceding it. She moved into a smaller apartment in Capitol Hill in early December. It cost significantly less than the South Lake Union place. She found to her genuine surprise that she was not as unhappy about this as she had expected to be. Claire, for her part, was not watching any of this with anything resembling satisfaction. She was busy. The first month of the transition to Whitmore Global was what Marcus had described in advance as the administrative equivalent of drinking from a fire hose, which turned out to be accurate. She spent 3 weeks in Boston for the formal handover process, board meetings, executive introductions, a review of pending contracts that had been waiting on succession confirmation, infrastructure decisions that had been deferred for 2 years against the backdrop of the transition. She worked long days and came back to her hotel room and ordered room service and read briefing documents until her eyes crossed. She was also, in the particular way of someone who had built something real with her hands, homesick. Not for the Boston house, though she was glad to be there, glad to walk its hallways and sit in the library and have dinner with her father at the kitchen table in the way they had when she was young. But for Seattle. For the corner of Halliday and 15th, the crooked brass handle, the buzzing lamp. For the specific smell of the place at 7 in the morning when the first batch was just coming out. She called Dee every other day. Dee updated her on the café with the brisk efficiency of someone who had discovered, somewhat to her own astonishment, that she was genuinely excellent at running things. 2 new staff members had been hired, trained, and integrated without incident. The back wall had gotten a second coat of the deep green, and it was perfect. The almond croissant recipe had been adjusted by D, slightly more almond paste, slightly higher heat, and was now selling out every morning before 10. "You changed the recipe," Claire said on the fourth call, with a tone that was not quite accusatory. "I improved the recipe," D said. "That's... D, the almond croissant is selling out before 10, as I just told you, every day. Do you want to argue about the croissant? Or do you want to accept that I have good taste?" Claire considered this. "I reserve the right to adjust it back when I return." "Absolutely not. The customers have spoken." "The customers, every day before 10, Claire." She had laughed, genuinely, for the first time in several days, sitting in a hotel room in Boston with a half-eaten room service sandwich and a briefing document on Pacific Rim infrastructure. The laugh surprised her. It felt like something coming back to her after a long transit. The first difficult thing happened in mid-November, and Claire dealt with it imperfectly, which was later one of the things she was most honest with herself about. It was a board member, specifically Franklin Cross, senior board member, 23 years with the company, a man who had served under her grandfather and her father, and who had always been cordial to Claire in the measured way of someone who had not decided yet whether to fully extend his respect. He hadn't been difficult in the announcement meeting. He had shaken her hand, said the appropriate things, smiled the appropriate smile. The difficulty arrived at the strategy session 3 weeks in, when Claire laid out her first quarter priorities, and Cross asked, in front of the full board, whether she had considered a transition period, perhaps 6 months with her father in an advisory capacity, before assuming full operational authority. The room had gone quiet in the way that rooms went quiet when the thing that was being asked was larger than its surface presentation. Claire had looked at him for a moment. She had felt the heat of the question, the implication inside it, the particular species of condescension dressed as prudence. She had thought of 3 responses in approximately 2 seconds, one of them sharp enough to be satisfying and wrong. She said, "I've been preparing for this transition for 6 years, Franklin. The advisory structure has been clear since the succession plan was formalized. If there are specific areas where you have concerns about the strategy I've outlined, I'd welcome that conversation directly." A pause. "No specific concerns," he said. "I wanted to raise the question for the record." And now it's on the record. She moved to the next agenda item. Afterward, her father found her in the corridor. "You handled that well," he said. "I almost didn't." "I know, I could tell." He walked beside her. "He'll come around. Franklin runs everything through challenge first. He challenged me for the first 2 years and then became one of my strongest allies." 2 years is a long time." "It is." He paused. "You were 3 seconds away from saying something you couldn't take back." 4 seconds. "Your mother's discipline," he said, which was the highest compliment he knew how to give. She didn't answer that, but she felt it. She was back in Seattle by late November. The city received her the way it always received people it liked, with complete indifference, which was its own form of acceptance. It was raining when her car came off the bridge, the same steady, non-dramatic rain that had been falling most of November, and the skyline was doing its usual thing, which was looking like a city that had decided against spectacle and was comfortable with that decision. She had a Whitmore global satellite office in the city now, a small floor in a building downtown, nothing extravagant, staffed by 4 people who handled Pacific Northwest regional operations. She would divide her time for the foreseeable future, which was a negotiation she had done deliberately. Boston for the corporate work, Seattle for the life. The morning after she landed, she went to Ink and Clover. She went through the back door the way she always had, and she stood in the back room for a moment, just letting the smell arrive. Coffee, lavender, the faint ghost of almond from that morning's batch. Dee appeared in the doorway with a look on her face that was trying to be professional and mostly failing. "Welcome back." "Thank you." Claire looked past her into the café. 2 tables occupied, a slow morning. The new green wall was exactly right. "How's the staff?" "Good." "Jenna is better than I expected. Marcus, the afternoon one, is still slow on the pour-over, but he's improving. And the almond croissants are perfect, and you know it." Claire walked past her into the café and stood behind the counter. She looked at the espresso machine, the grinder, the shelf of cups that had always been slightly inconsistently arranged, because she and Dee had different philosophies about whether cups should be organized by size or by use frequency. She picked up an apron and tied it on. Dee watched her from the doorway. "You know," Dee said, "the CEO of a global infrastructure company doesn't technically need to pull espresso shots on a Wednesday morning." "The CEO of a global infrastructure company can do whatever she wants on a Wednesday morning," Claire said. "That's the whole point." She reset the grinder, checked the calibration, and pulled the first shot of the day. It came out right. Ethan Cole left the logistics company in January, which was not a firing. He resigned with 2 weeks' notice on a Tuesday morning with a brief email to Gary Tillman that said what such emails were supposed to say and nothing more. He had something lined up, a teaching position at a private school in Eastside, junior and senior history, which had come through a recruiter he'd contacted on a Thursday evening while working on his resume. The salary was considerably less than what he'd been making. He had done the math. He could manage if he managed carefully. His apartment, a studio in Fremont that he'd moved into in December, small, north-facing, with a kitchen the size of a generous closet, cost $1,200 a month and contained exactly the furniture that fit in it and nothing aspirational. He made his own coffee. He had gone back to coaching, this time a youth league on weekends that a colleague had mentioned, and he had found somewhere in the third or fourth Saturday of standing on a wet field watching 12-year-olds argue about offsides that something had returned to him, some quality of being present that he had misplaced. He thought about Claire occasionally, but not the way he had thought about her in the parking garage, not with that particular complicated weight. It was simpler now. He thought about her the way you thought about a choice that had genuinely hurt someone, with the straightforward accountability of knowing you had done something wrong without the self-indulgent spiral of excessive guilt. He had made decisions based on what he thought he wanted, and those decisions had hurt a person who had been trying to build something real, and she had let him go without weaponizing a single thing she had access to. That was the part he returned to most. She could have changed everything with one conversation at any point during their marriage, and she had chosen not to. Not because she was weak, because she had her own sense of how she wanted to live, and it didn't include that kind of winning. He respected it. He was still working on deserving to understand it. He was, he thought, closer than he had been in October. The calls Savannah got in December were not all bad. There was one from a production company, independent, small, but legitimate, asking if she had ever considered a different kind of content, long form, something with more depth than aspirational lifestyle posts. The producer, a woman named Yael, who had a direct manner and no apparent interest in flattering anyone, said she had watched the 4-minute video and found it more interesting than anything else Savannah had posted in 2 years. Why? Savannah had asked. Because you were actually in it, Yael said. Not performing, actually there. It was a small thing, but Savannah wrote it down in the Notes app on her phone and looked at it sometimes and thought about what it might mean to build something that didn't require her to be standing next to someone else's diminishment. The process was not clean or fast, because no real process was. She had her own accounting to do, her own relationship with what she had been doing and why. And that accounting was slow and occasionally embarrassing, and sometimes arrived at 3 a.m. when she couldn't sleep. She was 29 years old, and she was starting over in a specific and necessary way. And some days that felt like momentum, and some days it just felt like starting over. She did not contact Claire. She thought about it once. She wrote a message and sat with it for 4 days and deleted it, because she understood that an apology addressed to the person who had no power would have been different from an apology addressed to the person who had all of it. And she wanted to know, for her own integrity, that her reasons were clean. She decided they weren't clean enough yet. Maybe later. Maybe not. Some doors stayed closed. Outside her Capitol Hill apartment, Seattle did what Seattle did in December. Pulled the light down early, turned the rain to something colder, made the coffee shops warm against the contrast of the outside air. She got a small tree for her apartment and decorated it by herself on a Sunday afternoon with the radio on, and sat back and looked at it and thought, okay. It was enough for now. It was a place to begin. January in Seattle had a particular quality that people who hadn't lived there tended to underestimate. It wasn't the coldest month, and it wasn't the wettest, but it had a specific gravity to it, a low, pressing stillness that sat over the city like a hand on a shoulder, not unfriendly, but insistent. The days were short, and the light, when it came, arrived sideways and pale through clouds that never quite committed to breaking. People moved through it with the particular purposeful endurance of a city that had long since made its peace with weather as a permanent condition rather than a temporary inconvenience. Claire had always liked January. She was at the café by 6:30 most mornings now, which was earlier than she needed to be and later than she used to be, a compromise between two versions of her life that she was still learning to hold at once. The Whitmore global work pulled her into calls by 8, and by 10 she was frequently in the downtown office dealing with things that required her full attention and could not be managed from behind an espresso machine. But those first 90 minutes, the dark street outside, the first batch in the oven, the espresso machine finding its morning rhythm, those she protected with the same deliberateness that she applied to board meeting preparation and quarterly reviews. Dee had stopped commenting on it. She had, after 2 months of watching Claire navigate the double life with increasing competence, quietly revised her understanding of what her employer was capable of, and had filed the early mornings under the category of things that were not hers to question. What she did comment on a Tuesday morning in the second week of January, was the man at the corner table. "He's been here 3 times this week," Dee said, in the low tone she used when she was conveying information and letting Claire make of it what she would. Claire was calibrating the grinder and didn't look up. "A lot of people come here 3 times a week. A lot of people order the same thing every time and bring a different book each visit and sit at the same table and stay for exactly 2 hours." A pause. "He tips very well." "Good. He also looks at you when you're not looking." Claire looked up. Dee had the expression of a woman who had held this information for a considered amount of time before deploying it and was now waiting with professional patience for the return. "Which one?" Claire said. "Corner table, brown coat. He's reading up, it looks like, something about urban architecture, which, I just want to say, is an objectively specific thing for someone to be reading in a cafe that's known for its reading nook." Claire looked toward the corner table. The man was perhaps 40 or 42. It was hard to say with precision. Medium height, on the lean side, with the slightly distracted posture of someone whose mind was running on a separate track from their body. He had the kind of face that was interesting rather than immediately striking. Good bones, a jaw that hadn't been shaved in 3 or 4 days, dark eyes behind glasses that he'd pushed up on his nose in the unconscious way of someone who'd had them for years. He was reading, and he was doing it in the absorbed manner of someone who meant it, which Claire had always found inexplicably trustworthy. He was also, as Dee had reported, not looking at her. He was looking at his book. "He's reading," Claire said. "I know he's reading. I'm telling you what he does when he's not." "Dee? I'm just reporting observable facts. You're enjoying this." "Enormously," Dee agreed, and went back to the register. His name was Daniel Rourke, and Claire found this out not through any particular intention, but through the simple mechanics of small business ownership, which was that she was the one who ran his card on Thursday when Dee was dealing with a backed-up order, and he came to the counter to pay. She saw the name on the card and looked up. "Daniel," she said, which was not something she normally said when running cards, and surprised her slightly. He looked up from putting his wallet back. A brief beat of recalibration. The recognition that she'd spoken his name, the reading of it off the card, the non-awkwardness of not making it awkward. "That's me." "You've been in a few times this week." "I've been in..." "Yeah." He had a slight smile that didn't fully commit to its own existence, like it was waiting to see how the situation developed before investing further. "It's a good place to work. The light is decent and it's not too loud." "What are you working on?" He paused. Not a hesitation of discomfort, more a considering pause, the kind that preceded honest answers rather than polished ones. "A book. Technically. Urban development history in the Pacific Northwest. Whether that constitutes working or constitutes a person with strong opinions writing them down for extended periods, I'm not entirely sure." "Those aren't mutually exclusive." "They're not," he agreed. "I'm also teaching 3 classes, which is the actual work. And the book is the thing I do at hours when I can't justify teaching things I've already taught." What do you teach? Urban history, architecture and city planning at the university. I'm in a corner of academia that has approximately 40 interested people in the entire country, and I've somehow managed to be one of them. That sounds like something you chose deliberately. He looked at her with a slightly more focused attention, the kind that recognized when someone has been paying attention rather than making conversation. It was. What about the café? Is this something you chose deliberately? Yes, she said. And then because the question was direct and deserved a direct answer, though it's become something slightly different from what I chose it to be, still mine, just expanded. He nodded slowly, the nod of someone filing information rather than performing understanding. He picked up his coffee. Is that better or worse? Both, she said, depending on the morning. He almost laughed. It was more of a breath of recognition, the sound of someone identifying a truth they'd encountered before. That's the most honest answer to that question I've heard in a long time. She handed back his card. Same table Monday? Probably, he said. Possibly Sunday, depending on how grading goes. He went back to his corner. She went back to the counter. Dee, who had absolutely been listening from approximately 3 feet away while appearing to inventory cups, said nothing at all, which was its own very loud kind of speaking. The first quarter of Claire's tenure at Whitmore Global was not simple, and she had not expected it to be. Franklin Cross came around, as her father had predicted, though it took longer than 2 years would have suggested. It took 8 weeks of watching her work. The specific moment was a crisis meeting in mid-February, when a manufacturing facility in Ohio had a labor dispute that threatened to delay 3 major contracts simultaneously. Claire had been the one on the phone at 11 at night with the facility manager, the one who'd had the quiet, direct conversation that resulted in a compromise that held. She had not announced this to the board. Marcus had, in passing, mentioned it in a briefing. Franklin had read the briefing. He stopped by her office the following afternoon, knocked on the open door, which she registered as a change from his previous habit of simply entering. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure." She put down the document she was reviewing. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the good chair, not the side chair, which was its own small signal, and looked at her in the considering way of a man arriving at a conclusion he'd been working on for a while. "The Ohio situation," he said. "It's resolved." "I know it's resolved. I read the briefing." He paused. "I want to say something, and I want to say it directly rather than through implication, because I've realized that implication is how people waste each other's time." She waited. "When I asked about the transition period at the November meeting, I was testing you," he said. "I'm not proud of the method, but I was watching for whether you'd be managed by the room or whether you'd hold your ground. You held it." He looked at her steadily. "Your father held his ground in his first board meeting in 1996 against 2 members who were significantly more aggressive than I was. I was there. I watched it, and I thought—" He stopped. "I thought, if she's the same quality of person, then this company is going to be fine. I needed to know." "And now you know," Claire said. "And now I know." He stood. "I'm sorry it took 8 weeks to tell you. I'm not always timely about the things that cost me something to say." She looked at him. There was something genuine in it, not performed contrition, just a man in his late 60s who had been in boardrooms long enough to have learned some things about himself and wasn't pretending otherwise. "Noted," she said. "And Franklin, the testing is over." He almost smiled. "Understood." He left. She sat for a moment after he was gone, looking at the open door, and felt something she could only describe as a settling. The specific sensation of a room that had been slightly tilted finding its level. She called her father that evening. "Franklin came by," she said. "I know. He called me first." A pause. "He asked my permission, which he absolutely did not need, and which is probably the most Franklin thing he's ever done. It was fine. It was good." "He's a difficult man in the ways that worth-keeping people tend to be difficult," her father said. "Your grandfather fired him twice in 20 years. He was wrong both times and admitted it both times. That's rare. He said he was there in 1996, when you held your ground in your first board meeting." A brief quiet. "He told you about that?" He brought it up in the context of watching for it in me. Her father was silent for a moment longer than usual. When he spoke again, his voice had the particular texture of someone remembering something they kept in a specific place. Your grandfather was in the room that day. He didn't interfere. He wanted to. I could see him wanting to, but he let me handle it myself. Another pause. I hope I gave you the same room. You did, Claire said. You did, Dad. Oh. Spring arrived in Seattle the way it always did. Not with a dramatic shift, but with a slow accumulation of evidence. Crocuses in the sidewalk planters, the light staying an extra 12 minutes each week. The specific smell of wet earth and new leaves that the city produced every April, like a reminder of its own persistence. Claire walked to the café most mornings now. The Whitmore global office was downtown, and her apartment was above the café, and the distance between them was manageable, though it required creative calendar work and the acceptance that some days the schedule was genuinely unreasonable. She had made mistakes. She had double-booked herself twice, and missed a call she should not have missed and written an email at midnight that she had been honest enough to recognize. In the morning, was too sharp and had to be revised. She was learning the shape of her own capacity, which was a different kind of education from any board meeting or briefing document. Dee had become something that didn't have a clean professional title, part operations manager, part coordinator, part the person who texted Claire at 2 p.m. to say, "Did you eat lunch?" and sometimes did not receive an answer and followed up. Claire had restructured her compensation in January with the same directness she applied to everything, and Dee had looked at the new number for a long moment and then said, with characteristic economy, "Okay, but I want it in writing." "It's already in writing." Marcus prepared the documentation. I knew I liked Marcus. The cafe had found a new rhythm, slightly different from the one it had had before, adapted to Claire's divided presence, running well in her absence because it had been built to run well, because she had spent 6 years building it to outlast a bad day or a week away. 2 new staff members, a repaired espresso machine, the disputed almond croissant recipe that was still selling out before 10 and which Claire had stopped arguing about, partly because Dee was right, and partly because the argument had become its own kind of ritual affection. She had kept everything that mattered and changed what needed changing, and the result was something neither version of her life had been on its own. Daniel Rourke became a regular in the specific way that people became regulars at Ink and Clover. Gradually, then completely, the way Hemingway said about going broke, except in reverse. By February, he was there 4 mornings a week. By March, he had developed the habit of bringing Claire a chapter of the book when he wanted a second opinion, leaving it on the counter with the particular casualness of someone testing a thing they care about in a low-stakes way, as if deniability were still available. She read the chapters. She had opinions, and she shared them with the same directness she applied to everything, which he received with the particular combination of genuine consideration and mild stubbornness that she found, over time, reliably interesting. He was not easy, exactly. He had the scholar's habit of precision that could tip into pedantry when he was tired, and he had a tendency to go silent in a way that required you to know whether the silence was thoughtful or distant, and sometimes it took a while to know. He was also the kind of person who asked real questions and then waited for the real answers, which was rarer than it should have been, and which Claire valued more than she might have expected. She did not rush toward this. She had learned something, in the years between the kitchen table and the crimson dress, about the difference between genuine connection and the idea of connection, and she was not interested in performing one in the absence of the other. What she found, slowly and without announcement, was that Daniel Rourke was a person she wanted to keep talking to, not as a project, not as a resolution, not as the next chapter of a story that was trying to resolve itself cleanly. Just as someone who was interesting on a Tuesday morning and was also interesting on a Thursday, and who made her laugh in the specific way of someone who had found the same thing funny for the same actual reason rather than the performed reason. One afternoon in late March, they were both at the cafe after hours. She had stayed late on a call, and he had lost track of time in the architecture chapter, and Dee had locked the front door and left them both inside, which was either an accident or absolutely not an accident, depending on your interpretation of Dee's character, which Claire felt she now understood quite well. Daniel looked up from his laptop and registered the locked door and the empty cafe and the evening light outside the windows. "Did we just get left in a cafe?" he said. "We did." Claire said. Is that a thing that happens here? It's apparently a thing that happens to me specifically. She looked at the door. Dee has a theory that I don't take enough breaks. Do you? Probably not. She looked at him. Are you in a hurry? He considered this with the seriousness of someone who actually checked before answering. No, he said. I don't think I am. She went behind the counter and made 2 cups of coffee, properly, not quickly, and brought them to the corner table with the mismatched armchairs, the one with the buzzing lamp, and they sat there in the closed café in the late March light and talked for 2 hours without either of them checking the time. It was not a declaration. It was not the beginning of something with its own music behind it. It was just 2 people in a room they both liked, talking the way people talked when they were no longer being careful. Later, she would think that this was what she had been trying to protect all along. Not the café, not the quiet, but this quality. The ability to sit across from someone and have the conversation be the whole of it. No performance. No calculation about what the relationship represented or what it signaled to the world. Just the person and the room and the evening and the coffee, which had gone slightly cold, and neither of them noticed. Her father visited Seattle in April. He hadn't been to Ink and Clover in years. He'd been once, briefly, when she first opened it, and had looked around with the expression of a man trying to understand a decision he respected without fully sharing. This time he arrived on a Thursday morning and sat at the counter and ordered a plain drip coffee, which was not what she would have chosen for him, but which she made without comment. He looked around at the green wall, the reading nook, the brass handle, the shelf of books. It's good, he said. You've always said that. I mean it differently now. He wrapped both hands around the mug. The same gesture she used herself, she noticed, and had never noticed before. I think I misunderstood what you were doing here for a long time. I thought it was a retreat. I know. It wasn't a retreat. No, she said. It was a foundation, different thing. He looked at her. The morning light was doing its sideways Seattle thing, coming through the windows at the angle that made the cafe look like a painting of itself. Warm, lived in, specific. Robert Whitmore was 67 years old, and he had built and run an empire, and had also, in the quieter accounting of a life, loved one woman completely and raised one daughter as well as he knew how. And this moment, sitting at a cafe counter watching that daughter move through her own space with the ease of someone who had finally stopped choosing between her lives, was one he would carry for a long time. Your grandmother, he said, would have loved this place. I know. She would have rearranged every shelf, without asking. Within the first 10 minutes, Claire set a small plate of almond croissants on the counter. He picked one up, took a bite, and looked at it. These are very good, he said. Dee's recipe. Better than yours? Claire considered this with genuine honesty. Yes, she said. Marginally. He smiled. Not the boardroom smile, not the formal one, just her father's smile. The one that lived around his eyes more than his mouth. Good. Means the place is in good hands when you can't be here. She looked at the cafe, the tables, the lamp in the corner still buzzing softly, the shelf that was 2 books short of balanced, the new green wall behind her father's silver head. All of it imperfect, all of it hers. It always was, she said. There are things about this story that resist the satisfying architecture of a lesson neatly arrived at. Savannah Pierce did not become a different person overnight. She became a different person slowly, the way real change happened, through repeated small decisions that accumulated into a direction, through the uncomfortable accounting of a woman who had built something on a foundation she didn't fully believe in and had to dismantle enough of it to figure out what she actually wanted to stand on. She made content through the spring and summer that was quieter, less aspirational, more honest about uncertainty. Some of it was very good. Some of it missed. The production company Yael worked for took her on for a project in August, a long-form documentary series about women rebuilding professional identities in their 30s. And Savannah was both a subject and a contributor, and the thing that resulted was the best work she had ever done, which she recognized with a complicated mixture of pride and the grief of knowing what she'd spent years doing instead. She did not contact Claire. She thought about it again, in the summer, when the project was wrapping. She thought about what she would say, about whether the words she had existed were words she was entitled to send. She decided they were not. Some bridges you burned, and the honest thing was not to rebuild them, but to build new ones somewhere else, and to be the kind of person in those new places that you hadn't been able to be in the old ones. She moved into a better apartment in October. Not large, not status-driven, just better than the last one. She paid for it herself. Ethan Cole taught history to juniors and seniors at a school in Eastside and was, by most measurable accounts, good at it. He had the teacher's gift that the best ones had. The ability to make the past feel like it was still happening, to make 17-year-olds understand that the decisions made in rooms long before their births had produced the world they were inheriting. He was also, by his own accounting, still in the middle of figuring certain things out. He had started therapy in February, which he had resisted for years, with the specific stubbornness of a man who had confused reluctance with strength, and which had proven, as these things tended to prove, to be the opposite of the disaster he'd anticipated. He was not yet the person he wanted to be. He was closer than he had been, and he understood that closer was not a small thing. He thought about Claire occasionally, the way you thought about the person you had been when a different set of decisions was still available. He did not think she owed him anything. He did not think he owed her more than the ongoing accountability of doing better in the ways he understood better now. He had no illusions about resolution. He was coaching the youth league on a Saturday morning in March when one of the kids, a small, ferociously determined girl named Mirabelle, who had been working on her left foot kick for 6 weeks, got it right. Suddenly, cleanly, the ball sailing exactly where she meant it. She looked at Ethan with the expression of someone for whom a thing had just clicked into place that they had stopped hoping for, and he felt something in his chest that was very old and had been waiting a long time to be felt again. He clapped. He meant it. Well, the thing about power and wealth and identity, the thing that was perhaps worth saying, though it resisted saying cleanly, was that none of them were what people imagined them to be from the outside. Wealth, in Claire's actual experience of it, was not the thing the videos had been comparing. It was not the restaurant and the dress and the implication of elevation. It was closer, in practical terms, to the ability to absorb shocks, to make mistakes without those mistakes being catastrophic, to choose things on the basis of want rather than necessity, to give other people the same breathing room when they needed it. It was, in other words, a form of security. And security was most valuable not when you were showing it to other people, but when you were alone in a room at 2 a.m. and you knew it was there. The performance of wealth, the version that Savannah had been chasing and Ethan had been adjacent to, was the opposite of the thing itself. It was burning security to manufacture the appearance of security, which was the worst possible trade. Claire had understood this at 22, watching her grandfather explain it over dinner in the library at Whitmore Crest. She had understood it intellectually. It had taken until 34 to understand it in the way that changed how you moved through the world, not as a principle you kept in your head, but as a thing you had absorbed into your actual decisions. An identity, the other thing, the harder thing, was not a secret you revealed at the right moment for maximum effect. It was not a card you held. It was just who you were, and the question was not whether to reveal it, but whether you were living in agreement with it, every day, in the choices that were too small to feel like choices, but that accumulated into the shape of a person. Claire had spent 6 years building a life around the question, who are you when no one who knows your name is watching? And the answer she had arrived at was this: the café, the croissants, the buzzing lamp, the reading nook, the particular smell of early morning and good coffee and lavender that meant nowhere else in the world. This was who she was. And it turned out who she was could also run a global company, and those two things were not in opposition because they had always come from the same person. The mistake Ethan had made, not the only mistake, but the central one, was believing that a person's worth was the sum of their visible ambitions, that the quiet life Claire was living meant she had settled for it because she couldn't reach further. He had looked at stillness and seen stagnation. It was a common mistake. It was the kind of mistake that cost you everything and taught you something, if you were willing to stay with the teaching. Savannah's mistake was adjacent, but different. She had understood that image was a form of currency, which was not wrong. Image did function that way in specific contexts. What she hadn't understood was that currencies depreciated when they were inflated past their actual value. You could borrow against image for a while. You could leverage it, extend it, perform your way through quarters where the substance wasn't holding. But eventually the accounting came due, and the only assets that survived the accounting were the ones that were actually real. What was real for Savannah had been there all along. The intelligence, the instinct for story, the particular energy that made people want to watch her. Those things hadn't needed the diminishment of anyone else to stand on. She had just been afraid to find out. On a Thursday evening in April, 6 months after the gala and 5 months after the world had reorganized itself into its new configuration, Claire Whitmore sat in the back corner of Ink and Clover in the reading nook, in one of the mismatched armchairs, the one that wasn't hers, and read. The cafe had closed at 7. Dee had left at 7:15 with a wave and a comment about the weekend staffing schedule that Claire had promised to review and had then immediately not reviewed because she was reading a novel she had been in the middle of for 3 weeks and kept not having time to get back to, and the evening was quiet in exactly the right way. The lamp above her was buzzing. She had never fixed it. She was not going to fix it. It had been buzzing for 3 years, and it was part of the specific ambient music of this corner, and fixing it would change the corner into a different corner, and she didn't want that. There was a knock at the front door. She looked up. Through the window in the amber light from the street, she could see Daniel. Brown coat, hands in pockets, the slightly self-conscious expression of a man who has shown up somewhere and is not entirely sure he was right to. She got up and went to the door. "I thought you were grading," she said through the glass before she unlocked it. "I finished early. I was walking and—" He gestured vaguely in the direction of the city, which covered a range of plausible explanations. The lights were on. She unlocked the door. He came in, looked around the closed cafe, took in the novel face down on the armchair, the 2 coffee cups from earlier still on the counter. "I'm interrupting," he said. "You're not." She went behind the counter. "Sit down." "You don't have to—" "I know I don't have to. Do you want coffee or not?" A pause. "Yes." She made 2 cups. He sat in the other armchair, her armchair, technically, though she didn't say so, and looked at the title of her novel. "How is it?" Better than the last 100 pages suggested it was going to be. That's a specific kind of good. The best kind, when you've invested and it pays off. She set the cups down on the small table between the armchairs and sat in the other chair, his chair, temporarily, and looked at him. He had his glasses pushed up on his nose, the unconscious habit. He looked tired, but the good kind of tired, the kind that came from a day that had actually been lived. "How was grading?" she asked. One student wrote an excellent paper about the relationship between urban design and community identity in post-war American cities that made me think about my book differently, which is either gratifying or destabilizing depending on the chapter. "Both," she said. "Both," he agreed. He picked up his coffee. "And your day?" She considered it honestly, the way she had learned to do. The board call in the morning that had gone well, the staffing adjustment that hadn't, the afternoon in the office when she'd been 3 calls behind and had eaten lunch standing at her desk and had promised herself she would stop doing that and then done it again. The walk from downtown to the cafe in the early evening, when the light had been doing the sideways April thing, and the street had smelled like rain and new leaves, and she had stood on the corner of Halliday and 15th and looked up at the cafe sign and felt, as she still sometimes did, the simple gladness of a person arriving at a place they have chosen. "Complicated," she said. "Good complicated." He nodded, not to fill the space, but because he understood the distinction. They sat in the corner of the closed cafe with their coffee, and the lamp buzzed above them, and outside the Seattle evening did its quiet April thing, and neither of them said anything for a while. This was enough. It was more than enough. It was in all the ways that resisted clean articulation, the whole point. There was a version of this story that ended in triumph. The powerful woman revealed, the humbled enemies scattered, the world reorganized into a shape that rewarded the worthy and punished the undeserving. That version was satisfying and not quite true. The true version ended here. A woman in a chair she loved, in a place she had built, with coffee she had made herself, and a person across from her who was there because he wanted to be, and the lamp buzzing, and the April rain starting against the windows, and all of it real. Not because things had worked out perfectly. Not because the wrong people had suffered proportionately and the right people had been rewarded in kind, but because Claire Whitmore had, for several hard years and through several wrong turns, kept asking the question that was the only question that ultimately mattered. What is actually mine, and am I living in it? And the answer, on a Thursday evening in April, was yes. The answer, at last, was yes.